Welcome, everyone, to today's See Me Story of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, sponsored by the Colorado Society of CPAs Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Working Group. Some of you are actual participants in that effort, so thank you not only for helping to plan these, Judy Thomas in particular, but also for participating and supporting our speaker today. My name is Mary Medley. I'm the CEO for the Society, and I am delighted to be your host, as well as the person who will monitor the chat, so that if you have questions or comments, you're welcome to post them there, and I will share them with Michaela so that she can focus on telling her story and answering your questions without having to watch the chat feed as well. Michaela Smith is now the controller at the Roaring Fork Golf Club in Basalt, Colorado. Previously, she worked for a larger local firm with offices on the Western Slope in the Glenwood Springs office. And she just made that change a while ago, right, Michaela? So
yeah,
she'll give you all the background. I am going to turn the microphone over to her and just remind you that you are welcome to post in the chat. Take it away, Michaela.
okay. Well,
And my apologies, I overlooked saying your title. It's not how you get there, it's what you bring.
yes, exactly. And obviously, I'm going to elaborate more on what that title means. So thank you, Mary, for that warm introduction. And thank you all for being here today. I know for some of you, it's you are working in public accounting and it's the peak of tax season. So if you were able to slip away from your desk, I really appreciate that because sometimes it's hard to. So I'm just gonna dive right in. So I put together a little PowerPoint and I'm gonna share my screen with all of you. It's been a while. It's been a while since I've had to do a PowerPoint. Like honestly, like college, I think was the last time this happened. All right. Let's see here. Just bear with me and try to remember how to do this. All right. So as Mary said, my presentation today as part of the See Me series is called It's Not How You Get There, It's What You Bring. Okay, so I kind of put together an agenda of just the topics I wanted to discuss today. I'm going to just kind of dive into my gap years and why I think those were crucial, and why I kind of hit that reset button before plunging back into academia. I'm going to talk about reverse ageism, as that is something that I did experience in one of my prior jobs. I'll kind of talk about the recent effects that has in today's society, and then also how to identify signs that it could potentially be happening to you. And then the next one is online education and just kind of the stigma that surrounds that. And then public accounting. And, while my time was brief working in it, there were some things I wish I had known. So I'm just going to kind of touch on those small things. And then just kind of to present day, just the biggest question I think I'm asking myself is, should I get the CPA or should I continue to get my MBA? So that's on today's agenda. And before I go into all of this, I thought it might be good that I share my professional background with you, because the majority of people on this call are accountants. So I just wanted to kind of shed some light on just my whole background. So altogether, I have 5 years of an accounting experience. In 2018, I graduated from the community college in the area where I was living at the time. I decided to get my Associates of Arts in Business and then also Communications. And that was kind of my test to myself to see, if I really wanted to just continue and get my bachelor's degree. So I did finish there. And then in 2020, I graduated with an online degree in accounting through the CSU school system. And the one right below it where it says 2024, I actually have applied to the MBA program through the University of Denver. And I will be starting that actually next week. So just like this presentation snuck up on me, like when I start school, it definitely snuck up on me too. So it's a 2-year program. So I should be finishing that in 2024. So that's kind of my education for you in a nutshell. And then as we get into my experience, I started in private industry. I worked for a construction firm. They were called Moltz Construction, and they were headquartered out of Salida, Colorado, for any of you who are familiar with that area. So I spent 3.5 years there. I started as an accounts payable clerk, and then it was a smaller company. So with that, I feel like I kind of assumed the role of just multiple other positions within that company. And then from there, I did make that leap into public accounting. And I was only there for a year. And then from there, I did switch back to private. And now I'm working for a country club in the area I live. So that's a little about me. Oh, and that's a picture of me. I dug into my photo roll and found this one. And that was back when I graduated from the community college I went to. And that was me before I majored in accounting. But actually, no, I appreciate accounting, and I'm so happy I went down the path I did. Okay, so my gap years. I think when people think of gap years, they think about that year right after they graduate high school. But for me, my gap years, I think kind of just lined up a little differently. And just I don't want to make anyone feel old here, but just to give you some context, I did graduate high school in May of 2013. So right after that, my parents, they told me that it would be in my best interest to go to college. However, I think the heart of facing question that always emanated from that conversation was, well, for what? And I'm someone who's very indecisive, and I did not know what I wanted to do right after high school and going into college. So I think it's safe to say that my whole first year of college was kind of this unmitigated disaster. And as you can see, 2015, I had an undeclared major because I didn't know what I wanted to do. My grades were slipping. You can see that little party picture, which if that could be a major, I might have been really good at that. But I think it was probably the latter part of my sophomore year that I just, I knew I was kind of on this downhill spiral, and just to keep continuing with school, but with really no intent behind it or goals, is really just, I knew that college wasn't for me at the time. So I withdrew from all the classes I was in, and I decided to just move back home and kind of just, regroup and figure out what I wanted to do. So from 2015 to 2016, it seemed like it was a lot of job hopping, definitely working kind of for those just more dead-end positions, from just working retail, and then I worked at Starbucks for a bit. But during my time at Starbucks, I did meet someone who eventually I married. But I think, that was just a very vulnerable point in my life. I felt like I was easily influenced by things, and I was throwing things at the wall and kind of seeing which one stuck. So kind of a weird period in my life, but eventually I kind of found out what I wanted to do. So anyways, 2016, leading into 2017, the guy I met while working at Starbucks, he got a job in Buena Vista.
We've lost your sound, Michaela.
Uh-oh.
Oh, there
Did
you
I
go.
really?
Now you're back. Now you're back.
Okay. Do you know where I cut out at?
You said your husband got a job in Buena Vista.
Yes. So we weren't married quite yet, but I think we were committed enough. So I decided to make that leap with him and move out there with him. And that was just a really great period in my life because I wasn't living at home. I was starting to establish kind of this independence that I didn't have before. And, it was with him, but it was also with me too, because I was figuring out who I was. So while we lived there, and then we moved to Salida, which is like right down the road, essentially. I applied for a position at the post office, and I spent a good amount of time there, probably 2 years, I want to say. And my timeline's a little off. I tried making this as precise as possible, but like having to just go back and reflect on all of this, it's kind of a blur. But yeah, got a job at the post office. I started as a clerk. So you would see me at the front window, and I would sell you some stamps and maybe try to talk you into buying something else. And then eventually I decided I wanted to be the supervisor. So I did end up getting that position. And hindsight, I would not wish that position on anyone. And just the post office is a really hard place to work for either way. So that I did work at the post office, and then I decided that I did want to go back to school and just take some courses at the community college, because I did feel like I was kind of stalemate at the time. So I felt like I needed to go back to school, and I was ready then too. Like I had a good break in between, and I felt like I was ready to go back and do that. So I enrolled in some classes at the community college, and I just, I kind of kept it pretty general and decided, I want to get an associate's degree in business. And then I ended up pursuing communications too, because a lot of that coursework aligned with one another just in terms of just degree requirements. So I did that, and then I also got married. But if you look at 2018, I shortly got divorced. So that was a very short-lived thing, but it was also, I think, a really just great learning period in my life too. But anyways, so in 2018, I applied for an accounts payable position. I had no idea what that entailed, but it was advertised in the classified section of the local newspaper, and I'm like, the post office was very detrimental to my health, so I'm like, I need to do something different. So I saw that position, and something was telling me like you should apply for it. So I did, and I got it, and that was great. And so I was wrapping up my associate's degrees at the time, so it just worked out really well as far as timing goes. And then eventually, like later in that year, once I finished my associate's degrees, I decided I wanted to go on and move it even further and get my bachelor's degree. So I enrolled in the CSU program online. And yeah, those are my gap years. It's a lot, and I could probably go into it even further, but I think ultimately my gap years from when I exited college during my sophomore year was about like a 3-year hiatus. So I'm going to talk about just my time at Moltz a bit more, the construction firm. So when I was there, like I said, I did assume just the roles of all these different titles because it was a smaller company. So while I started in accounts payable, I ended up moving up into staff accountant. I kind of took charge of just a lot of just the accounting operations within that company.
We've lost your sound again, Michaela.
Down that path of doing accounting. And it says my connection is unstable. Can you guys still hear me?
We can now. You blanked out for just a little bit.
Dang, I apologize for that. I thought with being at work, it would be a strong connection versus at home, but it's so unpredictable. So anyways, going back to Moltz, great mentor who helped kind of define my path a little better, just in terms of what I was doing career-wise. And that was all great. Like, I really enjoyed that part of it and just working with him and the people I did work with on the accounting team. But there was other issues, I think, that were happening behind the scenes. For me, that just, like, while my time at Moltz was a great experience for me, I think it could have been better. And that's where I want to talk about reverse age discrimination. Because at the time, it's like, I think this is a topic that does not get talked about enough or a lot, because we know what ageism is. That applies to anybody who's 40 or over. And I mean, there's an Age Discrimination Act that's clearly in place, to protect people of that age. But reverse ageism, like, it's exactly what it sounds like. But take a person who's 40 years and older and replace it with someone who's my age. That was just some.
Okay, we've lost you.
Imagine that, like, at times, maybe it was a little catty, but it started out just small, but people would refer to me as like a snowflake or a millennial, which millennial, it does have a bad connotation to it. When people think of millennials, they think of someone who's incompetent or someone who just doesn't stick with something. And I personally have never liked that term. I think there's other ways we can refer to one another that doesn't kind of belittle someone. So it was things like that that just throughout my duration at Moltz that I was experiencing. And I remember one specific time where it was an annual meeting that the company would put on for all of their employees, and we would talk about, just the performance of the company and how things are going. We would have project managers just talk about the projects they were working on. And my boss at the time had asked me, to just kind of give a segment about just the financial performance of the company. And the lady who I had worked with, who was also part of the accounting team, she's like, well, I know he asked you to do it, but I just, I don't think that people are going to respect you as well because of your position, but also because of your age. And that was really off-putting to me that someone would say something like that. And mind you, this lady, she was in her 40s, but she also had a son who was, if not my age, just a few years older. And I remember I ended up giving that presentation, but I remember going home later that evening and thinking, like, would she take it upon herself to say something like this to her son, who's my age? And I think ultimately the answer is no, she wouldn't. So if you're not going to talk to your son like that. Like, why would you talk to someone in the workplace like that? I mean, same age, like, it's just the age group. You wouldn't do that to your son, so like, why would you do it to me? And that's something that just, it stuck with me. And then it just, along the way, she would just make, and not just her, but other people too, make these seemingly innocuous comments, just, and kind of playful insults about my age. And it's just, you keep adding that layer of insults, and it just keep adding it. And at some point, it gets to you. So that's just, it's something I think about when I was at Molt that I wish maybe I had addressed. And maybe my experience there might be a little better. And then here is just signs that it could potentially be happening to you. And I've touched on some of them, but as far as reverse ageism goes, it could have anything to do with just like employment, promotions, layoffs, what age they're targeting. And then it also just has to do with, just like presentations, like I was telling you, like not letting you sit in on those because they don't think that your opinions are valid because you're not as seasoned as these people. So there's just a ton of signs that, it could possibly be happening to you. And that's something I feel like it's important to bring awareness about. So that's kind of what I wanted to touch on there, just as far as reverse ageism goes. The next thing is online education. So like I had said, while working at Molt, once I did finish my associate's degrees, I did decide that I wanted to finish my bachelor's degree. And I, the only way I could do that was online. I lived on my own. This was post-divorce, so I was living on my own. I had to support myself. And, for me, my parents weren't going to pay for me to go back to school. They did their part right when I had left high school. But I think at this point, it was on me, to kind of be responsible for those things. So I pursued an online degree just because that was the most advantageous thing for me to do. But with that, kind of in that period where I was with Moltz for 3 years, I knew that as far as upward mobility went, there wasn't many places I could go, like from where I was at. My boss, he was in the highest position as far as like the accounting hierarchy is set up. So I knew that I wanted to do something else. Like it was time for me to just get experience out somewhere else. And so with that, I did, did online schooling. And I think there is still the stigma to this day that, although I hope we're in this kind of post-COVID phase of things, but people still kind of do discredit and undervalue just an online degree. And so I listed 4 common myths that I think are kind of associated to that stigma of online degrees. And then I wanted to touch on like the things that I felt like kind of countered that. So 1, online degrees, they're not as valid as real degrees. And I disagree with that because I think as far as online programs go today, I think they offer just rigorous curriculum and just personalized instruction for those degrees. So it's set up the same way as you would go through one in a just more traditional based setting. Like it's all the same, I think, coursework at the end of the day. So I don't believe that it's not as valid as a real degree. And then, like I said, I think attitudes about the quality of online education are shifting. And then 2, there's the myth that the coursework is easier, which it's, a lot of online degrees, they are self-paced, but there's still deadlines. So for me, when I was doing my online degree, the deadline, I believe, was like I had just a discussion and a paper due every Saturday. But if you're a procrastinator like me, I waited till Saturday to do it. But I mean, ultimately, what I'm saying is there's still that deadline to get things done. So it's not like it's just self-paced the whole way through. And then it does require more time management, I think, because if you're pursuing an online degree, I think your situation looks a little different from someone who is attending kind of that more traditional based setting. You're probably working full time, if not that part time. A lot of non-traditional students, they are parents, they are, employees. So it's just, there's definitely a lot of different factors that go into why someone chooses an online degree over just going back to like that campus-based setting. And then, like I had said before, same curriculum. Like it's through the same school. It's with me going to CSU, I still did the same work that someone would who was doing an accounting degree there, but who was going to classes. And then there's the third myth that cheating is rampant. And that is not the case at all. I think, if you look at studies, they show that students don't cheat any more than the ones who attend those in-class sessions. Like the person sitting furthest in the back, like, and yes, exams are proctored. It was something I think within the software, but you're not allowed to have a separate window open to look up answers, and it's timed. So exams still are proctored even though you're doing it online. And then I think most learning platforms these days, they have these integrated plagiarism checkers to make sure, you're not just copying and pasting a whole essay that you found online. So cheating is definitely monitored. And I think, that's one of the smallest issues that online people are facing. And then the last myth I wanted to touch on is just students don't get to interact with peers, which is wrong. We are still doing collaborative projects like that require, each of us to pitch in. And with that, we do have to set time aside to meet with one another. We just have to find, a time frame that works well with everyone in that group. But we still do get assigned group projects. And there are live chat sessions that we have to attend, like it's mandatory. We have to do discussion boards. When I was doing it through CSU, there was a minimum response requirement, just as far as our discussions went, that you had to reply back to 2 people. And then once they, saw your comment, then they had to reply back to you. So there was that thread of communication. It wasn't just, it didn't just stop at one comment. And then I think, as far as the professors that I dealt with, they do offer online office hours. So, just like there's really myths that apply to anything, I think there's also just a lot of statistics and just real personal experiences that debunk those myths. And that's what I think just as far as online schooling goes. So just to kind of wrap that up, I did do the online degree, and from there, like I said, I knew my time with Maltz was coming to an end, and my mentor was very supportive of that. He himself, big public accounting guy. I don't, public accounting, I feel like it could go one of two ways. Like you either love it or you either hate it. And he loved it, even though he wasn't doing it anymore. He was there for 10 years. So obviously with him just being a big influence in my life, he's like, I think you should do the public accounting thing. And I'm like, what is that? So I did my research a little. And I mean, obviously you hear of like the big four firms. And so that was something I was kind of looking into. And I was training someone also to just replace my position. So I knew by the time I finished my online degree that I was going to kind of explore a different path for myself in the accounting profession. So public accounting. It took me a while to find a good firm, or at least a firm that would talk to me, because with the stigma that online degrees do get, I definitely applied to some of the big four accounting firms, and I just no response. And I don't know if that's because I know a lot of big four firms, I think they recruit inside the university, like they have that affiliation. And because I didn't go to that more traditional style setting of school, I didn't have like career fairs to attend. So I think that was just part of my issue of why I wasn't able to get into one of those firms. But with where I was moving, I looked at more local firms, and eventually I did find one that did take a chance on me, and I'm really thankful for that. So this kind of leads into my next talking point, which is, oh man, I'm not good at this PowerPoint stuff. Okay, this leads into my next talking point, which is things I wish I had known about public accounting. And yes, my time with the firm that I did get hired on at, it was brief. It was a year, and I thought it would be a lot longer than that. But there were other just factors at play and things that came up that made me kind of change that course. But during my time there was just some things I've learned, and I just wanted to kind of point those out. So yes, firms have cultures. And I think, in any industry you work in, any job you're at, I mean, everybody has some type of culture within their workplace. And when people go through the interview process, they look for someone who fits in, because ultimately you don't want that just disturbance of someone coming in and kind of ruining that synergy within the workplace. But I learned really quickly that firms do have cultures. And while I'm a huge people person, I think that not every firm's cultures align with who you are. So I think it's important that, the firm you do work at, you work in a place that allows you to grow and one where you fit in. And for me at Dolby, that's not an issue. Like, I really enjoyed the people I worked with. But that's just something, they do talk about it a lot, like the culture of the firm. And then staying leads to significant opportunities. And this is something I think about a lot because I feel like I did jump ship a little too soon. Because, for me, it was an opportunity that I thought was just like, I can't turn this down. But had I stayed with the firm I was working for, I felt like, not just promotionally, but also just with the various clients you work with, like, there's a lot of opportunities that come about because of that. So, it's hard to say if I stayed with the firm, what those opportunities would have looked like, but staying does count, like, for something. And I can't say what. Let's see, taking advantage of your resources. So I think, with as much of a people person as I am, I'm also, I think, that stereotypical accountant of being introverted at times and I think, especially within firms, they offer a lot of great resources as far as like the CPA exam goes. And for me, I wish I would have maybe reached out to just other locations where the firm was based, and at least did like a virtual thing, because at the time when I was working there, nobody was taking the CPA exam. So it was very hard to hold myself accountable. But I failed to remember that, Dolby Windland is this prestigious firm, and it's huge. They're located along the whole Western Slope. Like I'm not the only person who's taken the CPA exam. So I wish I just maybe had reached out a bit more to people at other offices and did something more collaborative with them. And let's see, it's normal to learn on the job. I think, it's easy to go into it and think, I think you're like, the thing you constantly think about as a first year associate is like, wow, I am really stupid. Like, I'm not understanding anything. And it's just this huge learning curve for someone who's coming right out of college. So it's safe to say that I think 90% of what you're learning happens on the job. Like, school only prepares you for so much. And also within the firms, I think just tasks are very specific to the industry you're in and the role you're in. So that's something that I just, I failed to remember, but you kind of have to step back and think, this is a lot. And I mean, you learn as you go. Let's see here. Constructive criticism is a good thing. And I just don't take criticism well, but yeah, sometimes I would get flustered with the feedback I would receive because it's just who I am. But I think at the end of the day, like if a manager or a partner is taking time to do this kind of collaborative review with you, it's because they care about just, your success with the firm and just professionally as well. And so with the feedback I did receive, I'm a sensitive person. So I think I could have maybe just interpreted it a little better. And then lastly, just another thing that, as I was there at the firm, and now that I look back on it, I think it's totally okay to ask the same questions. Because I kind of jokingly refer to myself as a tenfold learner. And what I mean by that is like, sometimes it takes one person to really just pick up and understand something. And that's awesome. But for me, maybe it doesn't take 10 times, but it definitely has to be kind of reinforced and repeated for me to really understand something. And, when it comes to asking questions and whether it's the same question, sometimes it helps to hear it from someone else because, everybody's learning styles, they are different. So that's something, because when I was asking questions, I just felt like, oh my gosh, like I would get nervous. Like I would delay that timing to hit the submit button to someone, because I'm just like, ooh, is this a stupid question? Like, I've asked this person like multiple times, like the same question, but that's okay. Like it's part of the learning process. So yes, that was kind of what I've learned working in public accounting. Who's to say that I won't go back to it? I have no idea. But those are things I think, especially as a first year associate, just to really understand and accept. Since I left Dolby, and like Mary had mentioned at the very beginning of this presentation, I did make that transition back into private industry. And right now I'm working for this country club in the area. And I think the biggest question that I'm facing is CPA versus MBA. And obviously I am doing the MBA program. So I think the bigger question is, do I get my CPA after my MBA? And do I do it concurrently? Because some people do. I think they're a little crazy, and I don't know if I'm capable of that, but maybe I will. But that's something that I think just in my position where I'm at now in my career is which one's going to be better for it. So I think ultimately at the end of the day, there's no real solution to this whole CPA versus MBA quandary. And I'm not saying that one is better than the other. I think it doesn't hurt you to have the CPA and it doesn't hurt you to have the MBA. But I put together just kind of the things I weighed in this decision-making process. So I'll go through it with you as well. So when we compare the CPA versus the MBA, the CPA is a credential, whereas the MBA is an academic degree. So I think for someone who is this, embodies this person like a numbers cruncher, and they want to stay in accounting and finance, I think the CPA is really good for that. And for someone who is maybe wanting to make that switch from private to public, like I think it's just so effortless to do that if you do have your CPA. And then, so the MBA, it's an academic degree. Once you do it, I mean, it's a degree, that you have for the rest of your life. There's no CPE requirements to keep up with that degree. So that was just something I thought about. And then you have your certification costs that are associated with getting your CPA license. And then you have your degree cost with getting a master's degree. And so when we're looking at the certification costs, I don't think a lot of people kind of factor in tuition as part of that equation, but I think that does count towards the overall process of getting the CPA license. So that's just one thing I wanted to mention. And then, so you have your prep courses, and it could be plural, it could not. When I was going through the exam process, I strongly thought about making that switch from Roger to Becker. So I know a lot of people do that because they realize halfway through the process that, well, this isn't working for me, so I'm gonna have to switch courses. And that's something I thought about too. But I mean, you're looking at probably $2,000 or more, depending on how many times you switch for the prep courses. And then you have your registration fees, you have your exam fees. And if you're someone who didn't pass like me on the first 2 times, that adds up pretty fast. So, I mean, it's definitely in your best interest to pass the first go around, but that's not always the case. And it does take time to understand just your learning style and the strategies that work best for you. And so, once you do pass those exams, then you have a licensing fee, one-time thing, so not a big deal. But then you also have the CPE that's required annually to keep up with. So those are kind of all the costs that are associated with the CPA. Now, if we look at the degree costs for an MBA, highly variable because it depends on, whether you're getting your master's degree through a public institution or a private one. The University of Denver, which is where I'm doing my MBA through, is a private institution. So they were definitely more on the costly side of things. But I mean, if you do public, I mean, I would say the average, I think MBA cost is about $58,000. So I think when we're comparing the CPA versus MBA together, you're looking at around, it's probably a bit more to get the MBA. And fortunately, I got granted some scholarships, so that really helped offset the cost there. But and it depends. I'm doing it online, whereas if someone was doing it in person, you have the room and board and stuff. So, but those are just things to consider. And then if we're looking kind of at the trajectory and how long it takes to get your CPA license versus your MBA degree, I think with the CPA, you have your 5 years of undergraduate work because there is that 150 credit hour requirement. You have to have those working hours, that working experience, and I think that's at least 2 years just on the job, and then there's 18 months to pass the CPA exam because when you're going through it, if you don't pass a certain section within a certain amount of time, then a credit could you lose a credit. So that's all just dependent on whether you're passing. So, and I apologize, I'm going to silence this phone. So I forgot to do that before I started this. So when we're looking at the MBA, I think, you have your 4 years of undergrad work. You have 3 to 10 years of professional working experience. And so there's 2 types of MBAs that when I was looking at programs that I saw, so you have just your regular MBA, but there's also an executive MBA. So I did the regular one, and the requirement for that was 3 years working experience before you could actually apply to the program. So if I were to do the executive one, which I couldn't because they require at least probably 6 to 10 years of experience. So it just depends on which type of MBA you're getting, and whether, obviously, if you're enrolled full-time or part-time. And then with my degree, it's a 2-year program. Some are 3. I didn't see too many that were 3-year programs, but I also did see some programs that were only 1 year. But I think just as far as my timeline goes, I wanted to do a 2-year program. So the last thing I wanted to discuss when comparing these things is just the salary potential. And I pulled these positions and these figures from the Robert Half Salary Guide for 2022. So that's just where I got this information. And then I kind of looked up, the kind of the positions, CPAs are usually working in, vice versa, like, and someone who holds an MBA degree, like what kind of positions they're in. So, you see it, so you can look that over, but I think ultimately you're kind of falling kind of within that same midpoint of salary. So, if we're talking numbers, I don't think like the CPA or the MBA, like it's just so variable, like, but I think we're kind of in that same kind of midpoint range of what people make when they have their CPA or if they have their MBA degree. So that was the biggest question I was asking myself once I left public accounting. I haven't completely nixed the CPA exam just like off my plate, but I've definitely put it on the back burner just because I don't know, if I want to go back to public or not. So I'm just kind of just factoring all these things in when making my decision. But luckily, I have some time. So that's as far as this whole topic goes. These were the things I wanted to cover.
Thank you, Michaela.
And I'm, sorry.
You did a great job in your PowerPoint. I've never seen anybody do so much fun treatment. I thought it was great.
Thank you. I definitely put this together on the fly, like very, very recently, as in last night, if we're being really honest here.
Yeah. No one in the audience has ever done something that way, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
Joking. Of course, I'm joking.
I wanted to seem a little put together. So, but ultimately, now that I'm kind of reaching the end of the presentation here, I think, just going back to the title of it, I think although a person, I think, has a final goal, or a destination, no matter what that is, I think a person does not revolve everything around that. It's really the journey that truly, when going through it, that a person just becomes who they are. Like I really have just been humbled by my journey. And I think that ultimately at the end of the day, it's shaped me into the person that I am. And I think it's how we respond to, the adversities that we do face and those roadblocks and those detours and like those splits in the roads that make us who we are. And I guess ultimately what I wanted to say is that, I mean, although our journeys look different, I think we do kind of face the same problems, especially within the accounting profession. So I think, the more we talk about things, I think just the more awareness we bring to these issues, and that's how we can just better the workplace altogether. And so that's really all I wanted to talk about. I felt like I went really fast, but
you did a great job. And I want to start with what Stephanie posted very quickly. I loved it. She said, let me know if you decide you'd like to come back into public. So.
Yeah, and I posted that, Michaela, because I left public after about 2.5 years and switched to industry. And it took me maybe a year and a half to 2 years to realize that I was really bored. And a lot of the things that I was learning in industry weren't nearly, like I was not nearly as challenged as I was in public in the things that I was learning.
Yeah.
And
there are definitely things I could agree with.
Yeah.
That.
And as far as like everything that I went to school for, getting my degree and getting my master's degree, so I hit the 150, and then working and getting my CPA license, I didn't feel like I was using it. And so I'm just very grateful that and I did try out a stint in another firm. And so, yeah, culture is very much a huge thing at each firm. And the other firm that I was at wasn't a good cultural fit for me. But I was very fortunate that Reuben Brown, brought me back. And I'm really just happy to be back and be challenged. So I wanted to just jump on that and let you know, if you do decide you want to come back, we'd love to talk to you, because I love your spirit. I love your energy. I love your honesty and your vulnerability. And all of those things are very special. And I tend to be a pretty sensitive person too. So I appreciate it. And I really admire that in you. So.
Well, thank you, Stephanie.
You're welcome.
I will definitely keep that in mind.
Okay.
So there are a couple of other comments in the chat. Judy writes, not many people take criticism well. In response to your comment about walking through review notes, it is something you get to learn, right, along the way. And as far as the CPA versus MBA, Stephanie, if I remember correctly, you did both, and Judy says she did both as well. They are not mutually exclusive. I know that's not an uncommon thing for people to do. So the future still awaits, right? The answer.
And she's so young. You're so young, Michaela. You have so much time to but I think we talked about this briefly the other day, that the further you get away from school, the harder the CPA exam becomes. So, keep that in mind. But the other thing is you are young and you have so much time. And I do know people who pass the CPA exam who haven't done accounting in years. So it can be done. It's just, I don't think it makes it a little harder.
Yeah, I think.
Go ahead, Michaela.
Yeah, I think, with kind of going back to get my master's degree, I'm kind of hopeful that once I kind of near completion of it, that I am kind of back in that rhythm of, doing schoolwork and just having that discipline. Because I know when I was just going through the exam process at Dolby, I just wasn't committed. And it's because I wasn't fresh out of school either. So I'm hoping that I find that rhythm again, and I'll be a bit more motivated this next go around, should I choose to do it. So
Yeah, no, definitely. But I mean, I was 30 when I went back to school, so you have plenty of time, and I didn't even get my CPA license until I was 36. So just keep that in mind.
okay.
The accounting profession offers a very long runway, doesn't it, Judy?
Yeah.
Yes, it does. And I just, we talked the other day too, and I didn't say anything, but I am not your typical finish high school, go to college, become a CPA. I was married, I still am, 41 years, and we haven't killed each other yet. But I went back to school, I finished my undergraduate degree. I sat for the CPA exam and passed, and went and got my MBA. And like I said, it's not mutually exclusive, because within MBA, there are accounting classes, and you have an undergraduate degree in accounting. So you're probably pretty close to meeting the requirements for accounting and the business administration. And I worked in industry. And then later on, I worked for KPMG. So it's not just because you are a CPA doesn't mean you have to work in public accounting, because the thought of doing taxes for the rest of my life, just I would probably have to stab myself. So I did other things in public accounting, and I worked with Department of Defense. There are so many opportunities, but the one thing about having my CPA license is that it has allowed me so many opportunities that I would not have gotten without that CPA license. And so I mean, KPMG, talk about, a culture. The first time I went to orientation in Dallas at their headquarters, and they said, "Welcome to the firm," I thought I walked into a John Grisham novel, because everything was the firm. And, we went to these training sessions and stuff, and you didn't ever want to be the last person in the door whenever they said you had to be back, because you were going to go up to their very front and be ridiculed. And I thought, the first time I saw that, I thought, I just won't leave. I won't go to the bathroom or anything, because I don't want to be the last person. But it's definitely a culture. So don't let any of those first things that you see intimidate you about public accounting. I enjoyed my time in public accounting, even though when I first graduated, I went, "Oh no, I can't work in public accounting. That's a terrible culture." But there are so many avenues. And at the end of my career, I still worked in industry, because unlike Stephanie, I have ADD, I swear I do. But I did all kinds of different things in in industry. So it's not an either or as far as MBA versus CPA. The CPA allowed me lots of opportunities that, I would have never gotten without the CPA. So don't say you can't do that. It's wonderful. I'm glad I did it.
I haven't scratched that off.
Yeah.
So Lisa writes, "Wow, an amazing path. Thank you for sharing and being so honest and transparent." And Erin writes, "I think the truth of it is that many of us walk a meandering path that looks straighter in hindsight than it really was." But I also wanted to let you know, Diane Nelson, and yes, I'm using your last name intentionally for this one, because I remember having this conversation with you, Diane. Diane posts, "I was 57 when I started my PhD." And Diane, if you want to unmute yourself, it is an opportunity to just give another perspective about
Sure.
how you can pursue the career in the accounting profession that you probably didn't imagine when you started out, right?
That's exactly right. And I started out my career, I graduated with my undergrad in 1975 from Seattle University. I started in 1974 working for the Internal Revenue Service. I had to have a job my last year in college. I stayed with them for 5 years, including the first year when I was a senior in college. I worked as a work-study co-op. I then went into for a CPA firm for, I think, about 8 months. I didn't like the firm. It was in Denver, but they were people that just screamed at each other, and that didn't work so well for me. Then I went into industry. I passed the CPA exam. Even though I'm an A student, it took me 2 times to pass it. I didn't take auditing in college, so I had to take the auditing part again. This was way back when you took all 4 parts at the same time. So I got certified because I worked for the Internal Revenue Service. That's how I got certified. And then I worked in industry. I was the first female president of the Colorado Society of CPAs, and the first one from industry. I was a double dipper in that regard, and I've never looked back. I retired the first time when I was 47. I actually got laid off from the phone company and its successors, and I was the only female executive director that worked for AT&T Broadband. I had been with the company the longest, and I could not sue them because they gave me such a good severance package. My husband and I lived on it for 5 years before I had to tap into my 401k plan. I decided to go get my PhD. It was something I wanted to do my entire life. And my husband, we were in the US Virgin Islands, and I decided I wanted to get it from a Research One institution. I took the GMAT test, which is the entrance exam. And I looked for schools where I wanted to live. And I applied to CU. I applied because I lived in Denver at the time. I applied to Colorado University or University of Colorado. I applied to University of Washington. I applied to Florida State and either Arizona State or the University of Arizona. I can't remember which one. Anyway, I didn't get accepted because you had to have a score of like 704, something like that. And my score was 590. So I thought, well, I tried. And then I got an email from, I call it the University of Spoiled Children, USC, and they were talking about young professionals. And I called them and kind of reamed them a new one. I said, what do you mean young professionals, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, and they said, well, this is what we do, but have you ever looked at this website? So I looked at a website that used your GMAT score as well as your GPA. Well, I'm a straight A student. And so I was able to get into Washington State University in the fall of 2010. It took me 4 years to get my PhD. It's not an accounting focus because I had a professor who worked with me when I worked for the phone company who said, Diane, you're kind of a jack of all trades. Why don't you do it in management? So I got my degree in management, or management focus, PhD. I taught for 1 year as a visiting assistant professor at Washington State University. I taught tax, which I love. I have a master's in taxation from the University of Denver. And and Introduction to Managerial Accounting. That didn't work out so good. So I said, I can't stay in the department. And now my husband and I moved to Newport, Oregon. We live right on the Pacific Ocean, which is fantastic. And I get to teach online for Washington State University. I teach international business. I teach international management, and my class is going on right now. And it's tax season, and I'm having a lot of fun.
Wow.
Thank
Yeah.
you for sharing your story. Michaela, as you can see, there are lots of ways to take the adventure forward, right?
Yeah. And I think that just goes to show also that, I mean, in some respects, you know, your journey is just this just incessant thing that we go through. And it's really like when one thing's ending, a new thing is beginning. So, and I mean, I think ultimately you decide, you know, whether you want to keep going down that path, whether you want to switch it up, you know, whether you want to just discontinue it altogether. But I think you hold that power to really just decide the course of what your journey is going to be.
Yes, indeed. So we are scheduled to go to 1:15 Denver time. And I have a couple of questions to put out there. I also remind you that you're welcome to post comments and questions in the chat. So question number one, Michaela, what do your parents think of your decisions now?
I know they're proud of me. I honestly, I don't have a very close relationship with them. I think just that dynamic of growing up and stuff, like we were never like this tight-knit family. But I think we do convey just our appreciation and our respect for each other, like in different ways. And although, you know, maybe they haven't completely said those words that I'm proud of you, I know they are. So that's what matters.
That's right. Those gap years were useful for you in resetting. And it sounds like you're having kind of a gap experience now too, with the changes you made in your employment, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I wanted to harken back to some things you were talking about when you were discussing reverse ageism. You mentioned that you found it not helpful to be referred to as a millennial, and that you had a colleague who said, don't do the presentation because people won't respect you because of your age. Essentially, you're too young, so you couldn't possibly know your topic or be credible, right? And then you called it the layer of insults, although sometimes they were playful. I think you even used playful on your slide. And I thought, isn't that an interesting thing to think about from an inclusion perspective? Because we usually think of those little kind of water torture drips of comments. Notice, Judy, I was very careful about not using the normal way we talk about those water drips, right? That eventually just get to the point where you can't take it any longer. But I don't think we often think of it in terms of age, especially people in my generation who do talk about the kids all the time. I really appreciated your observation that people 40 and older are protected by laws, and we need to protect those of you who aren't.
Yeah.
Same is true with ethnic diversity, with gender diversity, with LGBTQIA plus. All of those things fall into that category of, are you just layering on little sort of joking things that ultimately are discriminatory?
Yeah. And when I was, you know, I only did a little research on the topic just because I didn't want to go over my time limit here. But, you know, I was reading this article about how, you know, people my age did feel this way, and they tried to bring it, you know, kind of escalate it through the court system, but it didn't make any like type of headway. Like it stopped at a certain point. And, I think the older generation, they look at people my age and it's like, well, if you were to get displaced, like you can bounce back easily, but that's not always the case. Like there's also those misconceptions, I think, that when it comes to us younger people that, we are kind of at just this earlier point in our life where we can, kind of bounce back from it. But I don't know, it's just, the whole thing it's very interesting.
So you coupled lots of appropriately related comments together, and the two in particular, that perspective that's anti-online education, right, with being a young person at the same time. Was one more significant than the other, do you think, in finding those initial jobs?
I'm sorry, I don't know if I understand the question.
I didn't say it very well. Do you think it was more challenging to overcome your online degree in finding your job in public accounting than perhaps other aspects of what you were bringing to the table from an experience standpoint or an age standpoint?
I think it had to do more with the online degree. Like, I think that's kind of what posed the greatest challenge for me when I was looking for positions in public accounting. It's just, I think the firms that were kind of at the top of my list that I wanted to work for, I mean, they just kind of completely shut me down altogether because of my background. But I think also because I had the online degree versus, a degree from like Washington State University or something, where like the presence of just recruiters out there is very strong. Because I feel like, you go through a school like that, and I think it's kind of guaranteed at the end of like your program and stuff that you get into a firm. Like, it's not an issue finding a job. But I think, just with doing the online thing, it's definitely, I think, been more challenging, just being able to back it and also being able to find opportunities.
Yeah. So if you had one piece of advice for all of us who are on the call today about how to do it better, whatever it is, you get to choose, what would you say?
I mean, in an ideal world, I would, know exactly what you want to do. It seems like, I've had a lot of friends who had a very clear carved path of what they wanted to do. And I've always admired them for that. And, they're exactly where they want to be. And had I had that mentality, had I had that support, I think things could have been a little easier. But instead, I had to veer off path a lot. And I did have to just hit roadblocks that maybe, if I knew what I wanted to do, I wouldn't be encountering those issues. So I just, have a goal, stick to it, and see it through.
And it's okay to take a gap year or whatever when you need to.
Yeah, and I think I strongly support the gap years, especially for those who don't know what they want to do.
Yeah, Patty writes in the chat, when I graduated from college at age 27, I couldn't get a job with one of the big firms because I was too old, and that was in 1976. Interesting, isn't it? I suspect that this is one of those things that's going to continue to shift, by the way, because the demand for people is so great now, and there's a different perspective about what level of experience you can bring to your employer in comparison to what it was like back in the day, Patty, for sure. People didn't typically go into industry directly back in the day either, did they, Judy? You
Yes,
went
I always
big 8, right? And then you moved.
I always kid my students. I started out as the janitor in the accounting department and had to work my way up.
For sure. Thank you all for joining us today. We love having you with us, and we hope that you get as much out of this as I know Kelly and I and Tiffany behind the scenes always do. And thank you, Michaela, for sharing your story and all your great observations about the myths and about the things that are helpful to know. We really appreciate you taking the time to share all of that with us today. I would remind you that our next See Me story will be Wednesday, April 27, again, noon to 1:15 Mountain Time. And it will be with Lisa Hackard. Her title is My Journey from Devastating Grief to Mental Health. As we all know that there are obvious diversity, equity, and inclusion topics, and there are many that are much less obvious. Mental health issues being one of those less obvious ones until it rears its head, right? You can register online at cocpa.org